The lights inside Harvard's Sanders Theater beamed down on polished mahogany floors. Velvet curtains hung tall, and marble pillars framed the grand debate stage. The air buzzed with ego and expectation. This was no ordinary competition. This was Harvard's National Debate Invitational, the stage where America's future senators, scholars, and CEOs proved themselves. Students in designer blazers sat row by row. Their parents watched from the balcony, dressed like royalty. Journalists held pens, cameras rolled. Everyone knew who the finalists were, or thought they did. And then, someone called from backstage, replacement for District 12, Elara Thompson. Silence, heads turned. From the far back row, a girl stood slowly, wearing her late grandmother's old shoes, a second-hand cardigan that didn't fit, and a name badge printed in the wrong color. The crowd didn't hide it. A few chuckled. One judge leaned toward another and whispered, "This'll be quick." Another student smirked and leaned back smugly. Ra walked toward the stage, her steps uneven on the polished floor. But her grip on a worn notebook didn't tremble. She had never attended a private school. She had no coach, and the only reason she was here was because someone else got sick. What they didn't know was this: Ara had been walking Harvard's, always, since she was a child, not as a student, but as the daughter of a janitor. While other kids sat in air-conditioned classrooms, she spent nights trailing behind her mother's mop cart. She knew every hallway, every lecture room, not from learning, but from cleaning. As she stepped up to the podium, her opponent, Blake Whitmore, 3, dressed in a tailored navy suit, didn't bother hiding his grin. He had spent years training for moments like this, but Ara didn't look at him. She adjusted the crooked mic, placed her tattered notebook on the stand, took a deep breath, and spoke. "The measure of intellect is not where you begin, but whether you rise when the world tells you to sit." A stillness swept the room. One by one, phones lowered, pens froze mid-air. Even the moderator blinked. A single sentence, and the silence hit harder than applause ever could, because her voice, calm, steady, unshaken, didn't come from privilege. It came from resilience. It came from years of listening through janitor doors, from nights reading old textbooks pulled out of dumpsters, from practicing rebuttals out loud while scrubbing floors no one noticed. At that moment, someone in the audience had already begun recording. They had no idea the video would go viral within the hour, but Ara didn't care about that. She looked straight into the eyes of those who had laughed, and smiled, because now she had their full attention, and this was only her opening line. The moderator, stunned for a second too long, finally nodded. Aara began, but not with hesitation, not with notes, not with fear. She didn't shuffle through pages. She didn't look at Blake. She simply spoke. Her voice, like a violin bow drawn over silence, filled the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it carried weight. Weight that only comes from truth. She spoke of education inequality, not as theory, but as lived experience, of how standardized tests weren't built to measure brilliance, only to preserve privilege, of how success had become a postcode, not a potential. She cited legal cases, obscure ones, the kind only well-trained teams ever used, but she didn't glance down once. She spoke of policy, economics, and class systems, with the precision of a scholar, but the passion of a daughter who had lived every injustice. because while others rehearsed their speeches in prep school conference rooms, Ara practiced alone in cleaning closets and stairwells. Her audience, empty walls. Her coaches, old debate books she found in the trash. She had studied Harvard debates from behind mop buckets. Not front row seats, but now she was center stage. Every word she spoke challenged the room. She didn't demand pity. She didn't ask for applause. She demanded understanding, and she got it. Judges leaned forward. Professors stopped whispering. Even the elite parents in the balcony, the ones who hadn't even seen her when she entered, were now listening like their own children were losing. Across from her, Blake Whitmore III's smirk began to fade. He adjusted his sleeve. He whispered to his teammate. For the first time in his life, Harvard's golden boy was rattled, because Ara wasn't quoting Socrates to impress. She wasn't tossing buzzwords to earn claps. She was holding up a mirror to them, to the system, to the quiet unfairness no one in that room had ever been forced to live through, and the room felt it in the front row. Judge Langston, the same one who had said this will be over in 2 minutes, was scribbling notes at full speed. Next to him, Dean Harris whispered, "Who is this girl?" But Ara didn't see that. She didn't see the camera phones rising or the live stream that was already gaining traction. She was still locked in, speaking not to win, but to be heard. And as she neared the end of her argument, she delivered one final piercing truth. If knowledge is power, then access is justice. And I will not debate my right to both. Silence, and then something no one had expected. Applause. Real, thunderous, unstoppable applause, before the round was even over. The moderator raised a hand, trying to quiet the room, but it was too late. The shift had happened. Ara didn't need a trophy. She already knew. She had changed that room and beyond it. When Ara finished her final line, she didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She stood silently, letting the weight of her words settle into the wood beneath her shoes. Her fingers on the podium trembled, not with fear, but with the power of years of silence finally breaking free. Then she nodded once, and walked off the stage without looking back. Backstage, she sat quietly in a corner, far from the buzz and murmurs, clutching her old notebook, with its peeling cover and scribbled arguments. Taped to the front was a faded photo, her and her mother, smiling beside a chipped stove, surrounded by dollar store streamers. This wasn't just a debate. This was the first time the world had truly seen her, and in the crowd, the world was watching. That video clip of Ara's opening sentence, it had already gone viral before she left the theater. Student forums lit up. Ivy League alumni chats exploded. A Harvard graduate tweeted, "Janitor's daughter just cooked an entire debate team live on stage. Where's her scholarship?" News networks began requesting interviews. Influencers stitched reactions. Even a sitting congresswoman reposted her speech, saying, "I'd be proud to stand beside this young woman in any courtroom, any day." But back behind the curtain, Ara knew none of that. She just sat, sipping a bottle of water offered to her, not with pity, but with something new, respect. Across the room, Blake Whitmore III stood stiff, jaw clenched, whispering to his coach, trying to rehearse a loss before it officially came. His pride, polished and practiced for years, had just been shattered by a girl with borrowed shoes and fire in her voice. The judges returned. One called out the finalists. Ara rose. Slowly, shoulders square, chin lifted. She had never worn a crown, never walked a red carpet, never even believed she'd stand in a room like this. But now, every eye was on her. Not as the janitor's daughter, but as the one they all wanted to hear. The head judge stepped forward. This year's final debate round was among the most intellectually and emotionally powerful we've seen in over a decade. The decision was not easy, but one voice rose above the rest for clarity, conviction, and courage. A pause, the kind of pause that swells like thunder. The winner of the 2025 Harvard National Debate Invitational is Elara Thompson, gasps. Then cheers, then a standing ovation that shook the theater. Even Blake's teammate clapped hesitantly. Blake stayed still. A golden plaque was handed to her. She took it in both hands, her eyes wet, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she scanned the crowd, and there, in the back, was her mother. In her custodian uniform, hands pressed to her mouth, eyes shining, Ara gave her the smallest, proudest smile a daughter has ever given. And in that moment, the world tilted, not in pity, but in awe. By the time Ara stepped outside Harvard's historic auditorium, the world had already begun to whisper her name. She held the golden debate plaque close, walking hand in hand with her mother through the cool Cambridge air, down the same path they'd taken 100 times before, as invisible janitors. But this time, something had changed. The whispers turned into headlines. Janitor's daughter silences Harvard's debate hall. Teenager destroys privilege with one sentence. Who is Elara Thompson? Before they even reached the city bus stop, a man in a crisp suit jogged up. He introduced himself as a national journalist. "I was in the audience," he said. "Would you be open to a televised interview?" Ara looked unsure. But her mother gently stepped in. She needs time to breathe. By that evening, her voice was everywhere. Clips replayed on cable news. Talk shows quoted her final argument, and high school classrooms watched her speech like a masterclass. Professors from Ivy Leagues flooded her inbox. A publishing house offered her a book deal. Her high school principal left for voicemails, all begging her to return for a welcome rally. But the moment that truly cracked open the door came quietly. The next morning, Ara sat in their small apartment, still dressed in pajamas, the debate plaque resting beside a half-eaten granola bar on the nightstand. She opened her battered laptop and scrolled through hundreds of unread messages. One subject line made her heart skip. Harvard admissions urgent. She clicked it open. "Dear Elara Thompson, in light of your extraordinary display of intellect and leadership at our debate invitational, we would be honored to offer you a full academic scholarship to Harvard University, effective immediately." She read it again and again. Then she whispered, stunned, "Mom, I think they just gave me a full ride." Her mother froze, and then, for the first time in Ara's life, Vanessa Thompson, the strongest woman she knew, broke. Tears fell without words. She stepped across the room and held Ara in a hug that felt like it carried every unpaid bill, every ignored janitor shift, every closed door they had ever endured. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Harvard, not the viral video, not the applause. Just a mother and daughter, wrapped in the kind of love that built legacies from nothing. And beyond that apartment, a movement had begun. News anchors told her story, not as a segment, but as a symbol. Students began quoting her words in essays. Professors revised their outreach policies. Debate clubs from across the country shared her speech as gospel. She had not just won a trophy. She had reshaped the idea of who belongs in places like Harvard. And still, one final twist remained, one that not even Elara saw coming.